So today we're talking about two mothers, each with a half a baby.
Well, or about the wisdom of Solomon.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about today in HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forrester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
Jeff,
Yes.
what is one of your favorite family traditions that you do with your family that your family actually looks forward to?
Favorite family tradition?
Yeah, one of.
Yeah, so we're terrible at traditions, to be honest with you. Probably Thanksgiving dinner is our biggest family tradition. That and Christmas, but both of those tend to be at my mom's house. And but the kids all look forward to it. You know, David and his wife live out of state, but they want to make sure they're home. And it's just gathering together. Last several years, I've been kind of doing the turkey at Thanksgiving and all the pies and all that kind of stuff. But then it's football. I got to watch football with my dad, and then usually late into the evening, it's board games and table games and stuff like that.
Oh, well, then that's a tradition.
Yeah.
That's got to be fun. Do you all read Luke chapter 2 during Christmas?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, my dad's getting up there in years. He's 84, but he stood up and grabbed his Bible and read it at Christmas this last year.
Okay, well,
And
that's a pretty rich tradition.
It's really neat. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, we have traditions. We like traditions in our house.
Yeah.
We have all
You have a
sorts of
bunch of them.
zany ones. Yeah,
Yeah.
zany.
What's your best tradition?
Oh, goodness. I don't know.
Your favorite?
I would say probably hiding the Easter egg baskets.
Yes.
And then we dye Easter eggs, and then we have egg fights, and we make like big brackets
Yeah.
for tournaments for egg fights.
Yes.
Yeah, so we do that. I'd say probably that would be the biggest.
That's your biggest one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mine's centered around food. Well, so did yours, right? But
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun. We, because my mom and dad kind of have been the center of the kids growing up and stuff for all those things, all of our family traditions kind of center around grandma and grandpa's house, not our house. But a couple years ago, like for Christmas, we did Christmas Eve presents with the kids. And now that's what they want all the time is let's have mom and dad Christmas time and then go up and have grandma and grandpa Christmas time, kind of that. So they want it. I'm just not really much of a tradition guy. And so I forget how important family traditions are. So we want to get better at that, especially now that grandkids are coming along. We want to get better at the family tradition thing. So yeah, it's good. Good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so today we're talking about Solomon, and you referenced in a previous podcast that Solomon eventually became the wisest man who ever lived. Of course, apart from Jesus, the creator and all, he's wiser.
Yeah, from God.
But as far as just a natural human, Solomon is the wisest king, and this is where it begins to happen for him.
This
so
is
let's
where-
start
this
off.
is where it happens.
We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 3, and Solomon makes a pivotal decision that pays off in extraordinary ways. So it just says in 1 Kings chapter 3, we're reading from the NLT. It says, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and married one of his daughters, and he brought her to live in the city of David until he could finish building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around the city. At that time, the people of Israel sacrificed their offerings at local places of worship, for a temple honoring the name of the Lord had not yet been built. Remember, David had given Solomon instructions, but it hasn't been built yet. It took 7 years to build the temple, by the way. Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. The most important of these places of worship was at Gibeon, so the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." Solomon replied, "You showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you. And you have continued to show this great and faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they can't be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased with that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So God replied, because you've asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice, and have not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you ask for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one else had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And if you follow me and obey my decrees and my commandments as your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon woke up and realized it had been a dream, and he returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, where he sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings, and then he invited all his officials to do a great banquet. Sometime later, 2 prostitutes came to the king to have an argument settled. Please, my lord, one of them began, this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a baby while he was with me in the house. 3 days later, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There were only 2 of us in the house. But her baby died during the night when she rolled over on it. Then she got up in the night and took my son from beside me while I was asleep. She laid her dead child in my arms and took mine to sleep with her. And in the morning, when I tried to nurse him, he was dead. But when I looked more closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son at all. Then the other woman interrupted, it certainly was your son, and the living child is mine. No, the first woman said, the living child is mine, and the dead one is yours. And so they argued back and forth before the king. Then the king said, let's get the facts straight. Both of you claim the living child is yours, and each says that the dead one belongs to the other. All right, bring me a sword. So a sword was brought to the king. Then he said, cut the living child in 2, give half to one woman and half to the other. Then the woman who was the real mother of the living child and who loved him very much cried out, oh no, my lord, give her the child. Please do not kill him. But the other woman said, all right, he'll be neither yours nor mine, divided between us. Then the king said, do not kill the child, but give him to the woman who wants him to live, for she is his mother. When all Israel heard the king's decision, the people were in awe of the king, for they saw the wisdom God had given him for rendering justice.
Yeah.
So, man, let's jump in, first of all, to that beginning where he asks for wisdom.
Yes. You know, it's amazing because when God, I think this is the only time in the Bible, I'm pretty certain, where God approaches a person and says, what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you.
Mm.
And so it's like a magic genie bottle, isn't it? There's just a moment where you rub the lamp and the genie comes out and says, hey, I'll give you one wish, anything you want. And obviously this is the real version because there's no genies and God is God. So Solomon asks for wisdom. And there's a part of me that thinks, he asked for wisdom because he was drowning in the fact that he was young.
Yeah.
And he was like, I every day I wake up and I don't know how to rule these people. But at the same time, that's a really good heart. So
Yeah.
God honors his heart because, even though it was a practical and a thing that was, weighing on him in a negative way, probably, it was also a reflection of a good heart because, again, God said you could have asked for selfish things.
Yeah.
And you didn't ask for any of those things. And so because you didn't, I'm going to give you this and this and this and this.
Right.
But the part that I love the best is that how God says, no one has ever lived will be as wise as you, and no one who will ever live.
Right.
So God makes the prediction for every human in the past, every human in the future.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to be wiser than Solomon.
Wow.
I love it.
So even in today's society, you'll hear somebody say he has the wisdom of Solomon, or
Solomon of old.
right? And so that's a phrase that has continued on. That I mean, he's the standard for wisdom. When you read, it's one of the reasons why I love reading the book of Proverbs. I find myself, there's 31 Proverbs. You can read one chapter a day most months and read through the entire book, right? Or a lot of the months. And I love reading Proverbs. It's just really practical little nuggets. They're all little slogans, that are very applicable to to everyday life. He just was so practically wise. So his wisdom wasn't only some high level 75,000 foot wisdom. It was practical everyday, managing business, raising children, managing relationships, running, staff and employees and servants and moral decisions and
friendships,
all these things. He just practical.
What makes you happy? What is useless? What is senseless?
Yeah.
He covered the gamut, didn't he?
Yeah, and so that really is, I think, an important part with regard to wisdom, because Solomon tells us late in the book of Proverbs, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, there's nothing more important in your daily living than wisdom. Mm-hmm. So he says, with all your, above all else, get wisdom.
Well, actually, Solomon refers to wisdom and gives it her. He
Yeah.
describes it as her.
Mhm.
He says, "Get her
Mhm.
and seek after her," and he calls wisdom a her.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think that that's interesting.
Yeah.
because it's like she
Kind of puts
has
wisdom in the feminine.
yeah, and wisdom has to be pursued.
Yeah.
Right. So in the same way they would say pursue and find a wife or someone for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It is find her and hang on to her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Treasure her.
It's the beauty.
Yeah.
It's the gentleness of life when you have wisdom, all that kind of stuff. So he's so smart in asking God for wisdom, but he says, I feel like a child. Now he wasn't. He was an adult, but I feel like a child in leading. And what he's saying is my world feels overwhelming to me.
Mm-hmm.
The task in front of me is overwhelming. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed in life, the single best thing you could do is pursue wisdom, right? And the best thing to do for that is I would say read the book of Proverbs every single day. Every day, read whatever the core, if it's what's the date today, the 14th. So read the 14th chapter of Proverbs today. Just take in God's wisdom over and over again. Take in the words of God because he says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So the beginning of wisdom is not found in a leadership book, although there's wisdom in leadership books. The beginning of wisdom is not found in friends' opinions on Facebook. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and the fear of the Lord drives us to his words. That's what the Bible tells us. So Solomon was saying, I find my wisdom, the beginning of it is in God's words.
Yeah, it's great. And then, by the way, I have to point this out. When Solomon first responded to God, he actually said, "You have shown faithful love to my servant father, your servant, my father David." And then he says, "And you have continued to show this great favor to him by allowing his son to sit on the throne."
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
How even though Solomon was given this great gift of honor, and this position of power and prestige, how he still viewed himself as an honoring thing through his father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
The promise you made to my dad, you're keeping in
Yes.
me, right? Yeah. I think it's important for us to remember where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to us to remember that we are standing on the shoulders of great people who came before us. Any success we have could be attributed back to the people who invested in us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, partly what he's doing here. It's just demonstrating, again, his wisdom on this. The idea of having a wise and understanding heart. So knowledge is the beginning. Knowledge is the foundational level of, I can't make a wise decision if I don't even know anything about it. So knowledge is just surface. Then understanding is now having a bigger appreciation of the facts. So knowledge being the facts, understanding being now I get the surrounding peripherals as well. And then wisdom is how to apply those things.
Mm.
And so, you can't have magical wisdom. It starts with knowledge. This is why, I tell kids, young people, be a reader. I tell leaders are readers, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a reader, taking in information. Then you begin to pick up understanding, which gives you more the peripheral. It gives you context. It gives you all these things. But ultimately, wisdom comes from God. And wisdom is how to apply it in a practical, effective way that makes a difference in your life. So that's what he's asking for as a leader.
Yeah, and also it's there's another word as well, and it's discernment.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, discernment is described to us as a spiritual gift, which is wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
but it's wisdom from God. And so you can say wisdom from God in this context, because
because that's what he's doing here.
Yes, but
it's a discernment component.
Yeah. So for us today, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are people who, if you were to take a spiritual gifts test and it would come up as discernment, it's that person who has almost like the gift in the realm of prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they're a prophet in that sense where they, predict things, but the gift of prophecy, how it plays out in our lives today is spiritual discernment.
Right.
And so people would say, yeah, I just have a feeling that this is true about him or her. And then later on, people would say, how did you know that? You're like, I don't know. Or I think this is the right move. And, and people come up and say, I think you're going through something. Can I pray for you? How did you know that? I don't know. And I think that discernment, people with gift of discernment are awesome because it isn't necessarily conventional wisdom. It's more like God makes them spiritually sensitive and gives them knowledge that they shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. Does wisdom and discernment, do those come up in your spiritual gifts when you take tests?
Yes, they do, but they're not in the top. They may be in the top 5, but I think they're definitely in the top 10.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So spiritual gifts test has how many? Like 30?
Yeah, there's usually 26.
26?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think maybe it's like 7 or 8 is wisdom and discernment for me.
That's good. So let's get over into, because we just have a couple more minutes, let's get into the story here. This one moment. This, it's not that every single thing was, hey, cut the baby in half solution.
Right.
This is just a, hey, he asked for wisdom, and then let us show you an illustration. This is just a testimonial about his wisdom.
Well, I think it's probably the thing that happened first, right?
Well, it says sometime later.
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it meant, because it says he invited the officials to have a great banquet.
Mm-hmm.
Then it says sometime later. I was picturing it at the banquet.
Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. But it certainly is, it's afterwards, after he asks for God's wisdom. And then this is one of those illustrations. So to summarize and remind you of the story, 2 women, both of them pregnant, one, her baby dies. She swaps out the babies in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. And then the mother of the living child who's holding the dead child goes, wait a minute, my baby, this isn't my baby. And they come and argue in front of the king.
And you can imagine, by the way, that like only a mother would know this wasn't her baby.
Right.
And nobody else really, and especially since...
Yeah, because these babies are only a few days old.
And they're prostitutes, which means you can imagine it's not probably like a traditional family where there's a father involved or a man or anything like that.
Right.
So yeah. So that was a big problem.
So then the wisdom of very, just in the moment saying, okay, well, just bring me a sword. Just cut the baby in half. Each lady gets half a baby. It's fine.
Right.
Right. Which is
crazy.
So shocking. But it's kind of a funny solution, but it's a shocking solution. And then the mother of the real mother goes, no. Go ahead and give the baby to the other woman. I'd rather have the baby live than, to cut it and have him give it to me. But the other woman's like, no, that seems fair. And so Solomon in his wisdom went, wait a minute, the one who wanted the baby to live is the real mother.
Right, because the real mother is going to protect the baby at all costs.
And the Bible says there that last verse, it says, when all Israel heard the king's decision, the people were in awe of the king, for they saw the wisdom God had given him for rendering the baby, rendering the justice.
Who could have thought that angle around that problem?
Yeah.
So you have this problem in front of you, and I'm sure people in the courtyard probably thought, man, how's he going to solve this?
Yeah. How can you prove one or the other?
How could any king solve this?
Right.
And so Solomon comes up with this ridiculous thing, and people are probably thinking, what? And, kings have been known to order some pretty crazy things.
Right.
So if he was a crazy king like King Herod, that would have been a thing.
It could have seemed like a real
It could have seemed like a real thing.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, he's, which obviously, we're left to assume, obviously, that he would have never have cut the baby in half.
Right. No.
Right. So I just think it's brilliant. And
he knew that somebody would cry out. He knew that the real mother would do that.
Right.
So, sometimes we're tempted to go right at a problem, just hit it right between the eyes. And so, but instead, Solomon moved around the edges of it and said, let's expose who the real mother is.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what he did. And so sometimes wisdom is not about the direct course. Sometimes wisdom is exposing the truth.
Yeah.
The wise thing is you got to find a way to expose what is true or right. And I think in a society today where we get 2 bits of information and then all of a sudden we're blowing up social media with our opinions, right? You don't have all the answers. We've had this in my own family recently where we got some information and we thought it was, pretty shocking. And then, family members were tempted to really do some big things and make some big declarations. And then later on, we find out the information wasn't quite what we thought it was before. Thank God we didn't just blow up the family over it, right? It turned out it wasn't true. Stuff like that happens, and we rush in and we go right at it and try to hit it right on the nose. And Solomon doesn't do that in this situation. Instead, through wisdom, he tried to expose truth. And that really is the essence, one of the essences of true wisdom, is being able to expose what is true and then make a decision. And sometimes we rush in and we can't. We make a decision before we know all the facts. Yeah,
that's really good. That's a great application for this. And then another word picture that I'm thinking of is it almost seems like instead of heading the problem straight on, he sort of like went around and came in the back door with this, right? And he caught both mothers off guard, and they didn't even realize what they were doing or how they were acting and what they were exposing, and even in themselves, right? So I think of, honestly, I know it sounds strange, but just bear with me for a second. It reminds me of our church services, because when people walk in, they some people have like a wall built up already, and they're they almost as if they're like crossing their arms, and they're like, I'm not going to listen to anything, and I've made up my mind about these church services, and there's no reason why I need to live. And they sort of build up this wall of like these preconceived notions and these perceptions, and everything else. And I think that it's the church's job and that's why we put together artistic elements, and sometimes we'll put together humor, and that and what it does is it surprises people in some ways, but hopefully it's just insightful enough to where I feel like what we're doing is we're slipping around the back door. We're sneaking behind the wall, and we're sort of hitting them from behind, and they don't expect it.
Right.
And they go, oh, I didn't even realize. Wow. And we try to take them on this journey, to meet the felt need of what they're thinking about, and you could almost see their posture change, and it's almost as if they're uncrossing their arms, like, maybe I'll listen to what these guys have to say.
All for the purpose of exposing truth.
That's exactly right.
Right? Which is what you're doing. Jesus said to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Paul says live wisely in these days, especially among those who aren't believers.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of those things have to do with the idea of sometimes the walls in front of us make it impossible to go straight at it. Sometimes you have to find ways to get around, over, under, get behind preconceptions, and then you can expose truth.
And oftentimes, truth is a paradigm shift for people.
Oh, absolutely.
So they'll walk in thinking one thing about God, or what it means to, be angry at somebody, or to be angry at God, or have questions about Him, or about church people, right? And then what ends up happening is at the end of the day, they go, oh, man, that was completely a paradigm shift. Yeah. And so that's what the truth is oftentimes.
And so often you found Jesus doing the same thing. They'd come and ask Jesus a question, and He'd respond with a question, right? Or they'd ask Him a very direct question. He'd say, let me tell you a story.
Right.
Right? He wouldn't get baited into the duking it out, a slugfest of opinion. Instead, He'd always find a way to get the truth out without fighting opinions. And I think that there's tremendous wisdom in not getting baited into other people's fights. Right? And instead, your whole goal always in wisdom is to expose truth. How do you do that in the context you're in? Sometimes you have to get past the facade. Sometimes you have to get around the walls. Sometimes you have to step away from the argument and move into, let me tell you a story. Let me give you a third-party view, a different way to look, because wisdom is almost always, like you said, a paradigm shift in thought. And that's a brilliant way to view that.
So let's talk about this. Who is a person in your life that you consider wise? And someone listening, how should we look at and value these people in our lives? We should probably glean off of the people, in our lives that can give us wisdom, so we could avoid our own mistakes.
Yeah.
Or, not make those mistakes.
Yeah. Through my life, from the time I was a teenager up till now at 51, I've had a couple of key mentors that I've felt like have been incredibly important for me. Nick Boring, Stan Will, a couple of others that I knew, hey, they're going to give me biblical, godly perspective, but they're going to give it to me in a way that lets me find how to apply it in my life, not just not just instruction and direction, but here's the principles, which we learned before from David. Here are the principles with which you can make wise decisions.
Yeah. So that's it for our time. But I just want to encourage people, if you know somebody who's been given the gift of wisdom, just get as much as you can from them.
Yeah.
So we'll see you next time on HC Daily.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.